But I just keep thinking.
Absolutely.
The problem is that God's good is based in natural law, and you may not want God's good. Because God's good might be revolution and might be war. Just saying. So be careful what you wish for, because you might get it. Matter of fact, do you get more people during wartime to become Christians, or more people during peacetime to become Christians?
Read the Screwtape letters.
Yeah, yeah.
Terrible mistake for a demon to start a war.
Exactly. Precisely. Anyway, okay, so the word of the day, this is teen hodos. Teen hodos. This is Greek, so teen, this is the way it sounds. The Greek has an aspirated vowel sound, usually with O, but it also can be other vowels, but the O is pronounced ho, and then dos. That's the trailing sigma.
Still think that'd be a great youth group name.
Well, actually, there is a church called this, and there are youth groups called this. But it means specifically the way. Now, what I gave you on your note sheet is this is from Strong's. Contrasts this with what we read in Strong's about charis, about grace. I think that's really interesting myself, because it says, teen hodos, apparently a primary word, a road, by implication of progress, the route, act, or distance, figuratively a mode or means. What are they missing with that? What did they give us in grace? They just, charis, chario, hi, and they turned grace into what?
Agreed.
Well, a huge spiritual meaning, right? And okay, this is probably the most important spiritual word in the New Testament, period. This is almost more important than charis in some ways, because this is the name of the group that was the Christians. This is the sect of Judaism that started. They called themselves teen hodos, the way. They were called, and I'll get to that. I got it in all my notes, so we'll see it. How come Strong's didn't give us a whole bunch of things? You know, the spiritual church in the world, led by Christ, predicted by Malachi, on and on and on and on. Why did they tell us that? Because, and maybe you can guess the reason. I'll give you a little historical thing here, but maybe you can guess the reason. Why did they stop calling themselves teen hodos? What do you think? It's too Jewish. That was what Malachi said, that the Messiah's followers, that's what he said the followers would be called of Christ and the prophets. Teen hodos doesn't come just from there. It's in all the apocryphal works. It talks about the apocryphal works. Those who follow God would follow the way. And it's huge in Jewish, especially later Jewish thought, the idea of the way and being in the way and the way. And we saw it. Remember Mark? Almost every chapter, you got the way over and over and over again. Yes, sir?
Pretty much an observation I've seen. Anytime a verse mentions the way, it's not talking about the road. It's a reference to the church, and it's kind of like a little secret buzzword. It's like, pay attention, they're talking about the way, and there's a bigger picture to why they bring that up. So
You're right on the money, and I'm going to show you. If I get this up, why is it? God, wake up. I'm going to show you when we get this up, because I've got the scripture that specifically applies to it, and it's like a direct. Why isn't it starting? If it can't start, I'm done. Oh, it's alive. Oh, there it goes.
It's early.
Well, it's got a 10-hour my red line? The thin red line. Here's where we are. Here's where we stopped. Yeah, this is what I'm doing. Every time we get a first mention of something, I'll bring it up. So why don't I talk about the way, because we will get there, most likely. This is from 22 in the NIV. It says, finally they said, who are you? Give us an answer to take back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself? And remember, this was because who came to him, and I didn't talk enough about these guys. We will eventually. The guys that came to him were, this is the priests and Levites. This is from 19, the translation. This is the witness of that John, which set him apart. To him the Judeans sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem in order that they might interrogate him. You, who are you? That's what the question is, and we're at 22 now. In 22, we had old John saying, I'm not Elisha, I'm not the prophet. We need to talk about that a little bit. And finally they said, who are you? Give us the answer, take that. And here's the Greek. So let me go to the literal translation. It's probably easier to see how that is. Here's the King James. Then they said to him, who art thou? May you get an answer, etc. Upon they said, certainly or accordingly to him, who art you? In order that a response we might give to thee having sent him and us. Who, I like to put all the things together so that you can see what the choices are. Some Greek words are contextual, but obvious within their context. Some of them are not as contextual. Some of them, because they take a masculine form, T is who, which, what, or why. You got to contextualize. The Greeks didn't care if they were asking about a person, an idea, a thing, or a why. They just cared that it was a question. T indicates a question. To make legis, to make a logical argument through all over of yourself. So, got a hum there too. I need to fix that. That's obvious. Yeah. No error. So here's the translation. According they asked him, who are you? In order that we might give a response to those who sent us. What logical argument you make about yourself? Pretty good Greek. So, what I wanted to do is we had a little discussion, and this will fit really well for this, about not just, and this is a segue, I'm going to put this up in the front, I'm going to move this up in the front, but we had a little question about the disciple John. I think John the Immerser is obvious. You know, his father was a priest. His father expected him to be a priest. He was therefore a Sadducee, and therefore he rejected being both a priest in Jerusalem at some point, and he rejected being a Sadducee. And he followed Essene practice, although he wasn't an Essene. We'll talk about Essenes later. But the question
law
came...
required him to be a priest.
What's that?
And the law required him to be a priest.
And the law pretty much required him to be a priest. Plus, he was the only son of his dad that, okay, if you're a priest and your only son was born, right, in the very last, and you got a son, you're like, what are you thinking as a priest? My son's going to be a priest, right? He's going to be a priest. I got it set up for him. He's going to, he's going to get trained. He's going to be, and by the way, he was probably trained the whole way. When do you think John, we don't know when he made the decision, but guess, you guess. When do you think John the Immerser made the decision to leave his family and go out into the wilderness?
I'm willing to bet it was a foregone conclusion because he was filled with the Holy Spirit from the time he was in the womb.
So when he was 1 year old, he crawled off into the wilderness and started eating locusts? I'm being facetious.
Yeah.
Once he had gone to school, to Torah school, or whatever it was.
Yeah, he went to all the school. He went to all the training. And what do you think? What event? Remember his mom and dad? I'm going to give you a hint. His mom and dad were old. So what's that?
His dad died.
When his dad died. Yeah. When his dad died, I suspect, and he was probably, his dad was ancient, right? His dad was really old. So John may have been 20, he may have been 30. Who knows? But somehow, and by the way, how close was he with Jesus?
Cousin?
Probably grew up together, playing together.
Did he really know him though?
Oh, yeah, baby. Okay. All right. Jewish families. What do you know about Jewish families? Yeah, they're like this. So if he's a cousin, and the impression he's a first cousin, he's a first cousin, he's a Levite. He's an Aaronite. His dad's a priest. Okay. Joseph and Mary, are they countercultural? No, they're not countercultural. They're totally immersed in their culture. What do you think? Okay, so your cousin is going to be a priest. What do you want Jesus to do? Hang around with this guy. He's going to be a priest, right? Because what? What's the big deal about the priesthood? You know what the Jewish people in the ancient world and in the modern world say about the priesthood? About the Jewish people? Go ahead.
Just curious. So, did he grow up in Nazareth? Was John from Nazareth also?
No, but when did they
Did he
see
go
each
down
other?
to Egypt when
Well,
Jesus
festivals.
went down?
Yeah, all the festivals. They always see each other at festivals. And so when cousins get, and they didn't live that far away. I mean, you know that, right? Because Mary went to see, it doesn't say that she had anybody with her, but she probably did. She either had a servant, a slave, or a male that was doing, because otherwise, or maybe not. I mean, that's a whole thing. Remember I told you, in the ancient world, a woman who was abandoned, and likely after they were married, there's no way Joseph would abandon her, because you're fodder. You're fodder for rape and murder and theft, because a woman alone is basically an unprotected being. So it can't be that far away to go see Elizabeth. Can't be. And so Elizabeth, we don't know exactly where they lived, I don't think. I don't think it tells us precisely. But they were within probably less than a day's journey. And they saw each other, and we know they saw each other during the festivals. And what do you think? When they had a party in Nazareth, what do you think? Hey, John, come on down. We're having a party. Jesus and John were like this. They're buds. We'll talk more about that when we get to this point where we see this. But I suspect they talked together. They knew each other. Their families were big entwined. But the question that I had, or the thing that we were looking at, is what about John the Apostle? Who was John the Apostle? So I got some information here. I've read a couple of articles, a couple of papers on this. This is one of the best. This one comes from, let's see, this one comes from, I think, Bethany Church is my reference. Let's see. Let's see. The reference is Church. Yeah, Bethany Church. It's a paper that was written on this subject, and I read a bunch of these. So if you want to check it yourself, you can find this. But in John 18:15 says, Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since the disciple is known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the court of the high priest. This is ESV. Who was the other disciple? And if he was John, could family relation explain his connection with the high priest? So this is an article that talks about John, the gospel writer's connection with the high priest, the beloved disciple. First of all, at the end of the day, we have to admit that the author of John doesn't tell us who this disciple is. Okay, what is an indicator of?
He was so familiar with him, he didn't have to.
Well, not only that, in Greek documents, Greek authors did not usually identify themselves within Greek documents. It's like in the ancient world, if you go look at ancient world documents, yeah, it's considered bad form because it's not about you, right? If you're writing a history or you're writing a paper, you're writing anything, it's about the subject. And you'll get some, like the Latin, the Romans, really, Epictetus and a few other Latin dudes. Latin dudes, if you read Latin literature, I don't know if you're into Latin literature, but if you read the Latin stuff, you'll see that they talk about themselves all the time. But remember, they got the ego eimi thing going, right? Where the Greeks are totally out of that. So the fact that the author of John doesn't tell us who the disciple is or who really within the context who wrote it, that is a proof text. That's an internal proof text that the authorship was most likely that guy. That guy. So whenever you see, like they call him the beloved disciple, etc., he didn't use his name. He's presumed, right? We presume to know who he is because of the historical sources, but he didn't tell us who he was because he's the author. And that's a real indicator in ancient documents. He is not designated the disciple whom Jesus loved here. So linking the two together isn't necessary or explicit in this text. But the traditional interpretation has been identified this other disciple with the beloved disciple. And traditionally, the beloved disciple has been identified as John for good reason. Right? We'll get more into that as we go through John. Support for this, the beloved disciple is called the other disciple in John 22 through 4, as well as a close relationship of John and Peter. So now, for now, let's assume that this other disciple was the Apostle John. I think most people will agree that. I mean, I think that's a good one. The author of this book. If it was John, what was the basis of his connection with the high priest? I mean, don't you wonder? I mean, I wondered from the beginning. They always gloss over this in Bible study or Bible stuff, right? They go, you want to know even as a kid. Well, wait, why did he go in? And Simon Peter had to stay outside. Well, what's with that, right? I mean, was Peter a coward? Yeah, but, we know, yeah.
They fished together.
Yeah, they fished together. Let's see about that. That's good information, right? What was his connection with the high priest? We shouldn't assume that John, being a fisherman, would have no contact with anyone outside of that occupation. In fact, there's evidence that John's family business was really lucrative. As Mark 1:20 says that they were big enough to have hired employees. It might have been possible that John's family knew the high priest just because of their popularity at the shore. All right. In the era when most people, if you haven't noticed, it's really interesting. Lutheran churches are usually filled with, it's pretty interesting, lawyers and doctors, and you get engineers, and you get professional people, right? We do get, probably in a lesser amounts, which is almost sad, you get people that are working on the lines and things like that, but usually it's because they came from a Lutheran background, right? But really, it's pretty interesting that if you look at different denominations and you see what those denominations, what characterizes their makeup as a denomination, right? So, where do we put fishermen?
One above shepherds? I don't know.
Yeah, you got my point, right? Where do we put farmers? Well, they're just farmers. The guys work the land, right? Okay, now let's go back 200 years, even 100 years. Well, now 200 years. Go back 200 years. What is the main makeup of every Lutheran church in America, especially the Midwest? Farmers, right? They're the people of the soil. They're the average guy. They're the person, right? They're the people that are your normal people. Now, what do you got in this land? You got farmers. You got dirt farmers. You got some other people. You got professionals. Where do you think the fishermen are in this grouping?
Sea of Galilee, there's lots of fishes.
Yeah, but where are they in the class structure
Oh.
of occupation? You think?
Blue collar?
Really? What do they have to own?
A boat.
You have to have a boat. You have to have what else? Nets. You have to have maybe other people working for you. You have to have a little bit of capital. You have to have knowledge, right? Because you can't, look, anybody knows they got boats, you just take a boat out on a sea and go, hey, I'm going. No. Unless Jesus is walking on the water and he's with you, I wouldn't advise it. You got to know what you're doing, right, before you're out sailing in a boat. So our assumption is the fishermen, because what do we do for fishing? It's a
It's a pastime.
It's a pastime, it's a sport, it's a hobby occupation, right? Right? And plus, fishermen on our scale, modern scale, right, are down here. Yes, sir.
In a starvation culture, farmers and fishermen would be vitally important. I mean, they would be the cardiologists of the society.
Yeah, so to speak, they're the guys that are producing the goods. But my point is this, you know, to be a farmer, all you need is a stick. And you probably should steal some seed, but you got to have some seed and a stick, right? To be a farmer.
You have to have a mule or a donkey.
Well,
Farmers.
in the modern era, well, in the
No.
200-year era. In this era, in this era, you know, and I think I told you that animals were what made the revolution in whatever possible. But what you can do is you can borrow. And they even do that now. If you're not as established as a farmer in the modern era, you could go borrow, you know, somebody's John Deere. Maybe he'll loan you a John Deere and you put some gas in it, or maybe electric charge. Oh no, there's still electric charge John Deeres. Anyway, to go and plow your field. But in the ancient world, you know, literally all you needed was a stick and some seed to be a farmer. But to be a fisherman, you got to have a boat, you got to have nets, you got to have some means of getting the fish. So it's here's farmer. Shepherd may be lower, because what do you need to be a shepherd? You need a big stick, right? A big stick and some sheep. But you don't even have to have the sheep. You can be a hired man, right? I'm just saying. Our impression of fishermen is they're like down here. But the idea in this era is that these people are middle class. These are staunchly middle class, and the fishermen are upper middle class. And what he says is right. You know, the popularity at the shore. Why popularity at the shore?
They bring in
food. Well, what's the big deal about
everyone
fish?
eats.
Huh?
They bring in a big haul, everyone eats.
And what's the big deal about fish? There's a huge thing about fish.
It has to be fresh. They don't consider them to have blood. They consider them, you don't have to sacrifice them at the temple.
You don't have to sacrifice fish at the temple. That's right. You don't have to sacrifice any of it, and it's meat.
Protein.
It's meat. It's protein. It's 100% protein. You eat them. You can eat them raw. You can eat them cooked. You can eat them filleted. You can eat them roasted. You can eat them any way you want. They are great. You can fry them up with batter, right? Fish are meat. So if you're a fisherman and you're a good fisherman, you are proteinated. Your children are smarter. You are smarter. You're able to produce the proteins you need for your brain. This is one of the biggest problems in India, because India has a caste system and they don't eat much meat. Blacks and the Brahmins do. Doesn't talk much about it. But you don't get enough protein from lentils and beans. You can eat 15 pounds of beans and not get as much protein as you get out of 1 ounce of steak. Steak is meat. Fish is meat. And your brain development of children is dependent on meat. That's why, by the way, who do we see coming over here and working? Who's working the phones in India? It's not the poor class. It's not the low class. It's the Brahmin class, because their kids have been educated and they've had enough meat and protein, so they are not retarded by not having protein as a child. So anyway, so those people that are vegans who are keeping the protein and the milk from their kids are going to ruin their children, which is, we knew that's true anywhere. But the point is, I can't express this any stronger to you, that the fishermen in this society are an upper middle class and even maybe a lower upper class group of people. I know that we love to say that Jesus brought the poor fishermen in, right? But they weren't. And this is what this is kind of saying. There is also a chance that John might have priestly blood in him. Mark 15:40 describes the women who were at the foot of the cross as Jesus was crucified. It says, there were also women looking on for a distance, among whom were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph and Salome. So Mark identifies 3 women at the cross, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Joseph, Salome, of James and Yohes. Why do they call him that? It's funny. Compare with the parallel passage in Matthew, among whom were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. That may be a misspelling. Matthew 27:56. Matthew also identifies the freedom of the cross, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Joseph, another spelling of Mark's choice, Joseph, the mother of the sons of Zebedee, including the apostle John. That's Mark 1:19 through 20. When you compare these lists, we wonder whether Mark's Salome is the proper name for Matthew's, the mother of the sons of Zebedee, or John's mom. Oh, yes, sir. Sorry.
This is a slight aside, but something I was reading elsewhere. If John is the writer, the Apostle John, the writer, is writing about himself, he's doing it in the second person because he refers to the other disciple and Peter were running to the tomb, and then there's kind of a little editorial, but the other disciple got there first. Kind of like we were racing, but I got there first, and I got to look inside first. But I'm not going to say it in the first person.
Well, they're homie buds,
Yeah.
right? Okay, with your brother or your cousins, right, or whatever, don't you do that, right? First one to the farmhouse, first one to the barn, first one to the kitchen, right? Yeah, this is total sibling kind of stuff, and you're right on the money. Okay, so compare the parallel passage. Are we past this? See, is that be including the gospel? When we compare these lists, we wonder whether Mark Salome is a proper name for Matthew's mother of sons of Zebedee or John's mom, because much of the other material is tightly parallel between these passages. It's safe to say that Salome equals John's mom. Now, let's see what we got here. We got some cool comparison charts. Now let's bring in the Gospel of John. While standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Now, okay, why the difference in lists? And I think I've told you this over and over in the Greek. Do Greeks care who was there? Not really. Unless it supports their logos to tell us, they don't care. It's got to support the logos to tell us. In the English world, and even in the Latin world, what do we want? We want to know everybody's there, the blood type, the birthdays, who they are, what they look like, right? That's the way we work. When you got limited space, you got limited time, and the logos to tell us you're trying to get out in the piece. So the logos to tell us is the important thing, not who was there per se. But if they're mentioned, they are important to the logos to tell us, right? There's a debate whether John was 3 or 4 women standing before the cross. If 4, it is Mary, Jesus' mother, Mary's sister, Mary, Clopas' wife, Mary Magdalene. But the Greek text could read, his mother's sister is Mary, the wife of Clopas. So it would be Mary, Jesus' mother, Mary's sister named Mary. And we'll get to this, right? Who was Clopas' wife. Mary Magdalene. However, it's probably not the best way to read the passage, simply because it would require that Mary's parents not only named her Mary, but also named her sister Mary. Unless you're George Foreman, it doesn't make much sense. So now let's compare John's list of 4 women with Matthew and Mark's list of 3. So here's a comparison. So we got, the top is John's list, and the bottom is Matthew and Mark's list. Mary, Jesus' mother, Mary, mother of James and Joseph, Mary's sister, Salome, John's mother, Mary, Clopas' wife, Mary Magdalene, Mary Magdalene. So these are comparison. If our logic is correct, both John and Matthew and Mark put Jesus' mother Mary and Mary Magdalene at the foot of the cross. Matthew and Mark note that Mary was the mother of James and Joseph. We know James was the half-brother of Jesus, and it would have been natural for Mary and Joseph to name one of their sons after the patriarch of the family. John alone lists Mary, Clopas' wife. But it's likely that John and Mark referred to the same person when they refer to Mary's sister Salome, who was also John's mother. This would mean John the Apostle and Jesus shared some relation. To take things a step further, we know from Luke's Gospel that Mary, Jesus' mother, was related to Elizabeth, mother of John the Baptist. Some translations say they were cousins. The Greek word can simply mean a relative, leaving the connection uncertain. Luke tells us that Elizabeth was one of the daughters of Aaron, meaning she comes from priestly stock. To summarize, Mary, Jesus' mother, is related to Elizabeth, who was from a priestly family. Mary's sister Salome, the Apostle John's mother, must also have been related to Elizabeth. Then, which means the Apostle John had a very close family connections with priests. You wonder why John, the gospel writer, was interested in knowing anything about John the Baptist and Jesus and the whole 9 yards? These are family connections. Putting the icing on the cake is a church father named Eusebius, who quoted Polycrates, an even older church father, who said that John, the son of Zebedee, the Apostle John, was a priest. Now, I know we don't study or read the Apostolic Fathers. We should. It should be training for all our children. It should be a training for us, because these are the guys who are the early witnesses of the church. But it's really important what they wrote, because they were the closest to the affairs of the early church. And they knew some of the apostles, by the way. Remember I told you, I think it was, who was it I told you? Was it Eusebius? I can't remember. One of them actually saw John, and saw John when he was a child, and talked about John's gospel. I think it was Eusebius. All in all, assuming all these connections are legitimate and that synoptics and John are speaking of the same people, we can say that with relative certainty, the Apostle John, the beloved disciple, the other disciple, likely had a familial tie with the priest, which would explain the note in John 18:15 through 16 about him being known by the high priest.
But if John was a priest, wouldn't Zebedee have to be a priest? I mean,
Could be, because remember, we don't know what the occupation. Well, do we know the occupation of Zechariah, of John the Immerser's father?
yeah, he was.
Yeah, he was a priest.
He was
served in the
serving when
temple.
he was struck.
No, I mean his occupation in
besides being a
town.
priest. Oh, in town. Right.
Because see, being a priest was supposed to feed the family, but it didn't, obviously.
You know, they rotated and they weren't there all the time.
That's right. And so how are you going to feed your family? You got to do something for a living. So yeah.
Fishermen.
And by the way, okay, I think they were hurting for priests. They needed more priests, right, all the time. But to be a priest, you have to have an education, you have to have connections, you have to be able to be in the whole thing, right? So, it ain't that easy, especially second sons, right, or whatever, if you're not quite as talented as you'd like, right, to be that. Yes, sir.
Could they also just mean in the priestly line?
Could be, yes. Which, if you were in the priestly line, that means you could be a priest. Now, okay, when you start out, right, you might have, well, there were like 5 total, right? 2 of them got whacked, so there's 3 priests, right? 3, and then Aaron. So their sons, right, and their daughters, got married, and they produced more priests. So eventually, you're like rabbits. You're like, human beings keep making more children, which is part of your job. That's what God tells you to do. So you're making these children, and what do you get? More children. And part of the problem is, like, if you have land, you start with so much, you got 600 acres, you split it in the first 2, got 300 each, you split it again, but you're splitting 4 in the next generation, right? That's if you have 2 kids. What if you have 10 kids, right? So my point is this: you eventually reach a point where you have a way more than you need. It always happens that way. So they likely had more priests than they needed until you get a purge of the priests, which, well, it did eventually happen in 70 AD, or they left, right? So my point is that you have too many, and so you're going to have to do something with them. So what? They become fishermen. And by the way, I proved to you, I think, when I shoved out, that where's the fishermen? They're up here. Yeah. They're up here in the society. We see them down here, but they're there. Yes, sir.
Kind of like the Italians, you're either a priest or you're part of the mafia. The old joke there.
Oh,
Or here you're either a priest priest or a fisherman, right?
Oh, I forgot to finish my thought at the very beginning. I said, in the Jewish community, the ancient Jews and even modern Jews would tell you there are Aaronites, Levites, and other Jews. That is a saying of Judaism. There are Aaronites, there are priests, there are Levites, and there's other Jews. That's their words, not mine. Okay? So what do you gather from that? Even, yeah, it's what's funny is, well, they did, anyway, whatever. So let's go to the next verse. So this isn't a 100% proof text, but I think it's a good proof text that, yes, most likely John the Apostle had some connection to the high priest, maybe through his mother, maybe through his family. But otherwise, when he went running in, what would have happened? They wouldn't have let him in. Come on. You don't let dupe heads into the Sanhedrin and the priests, right? Modern comparison.
Going into the Senate chamber, you can't go in if it's in session unless you're Senate.
Yeah, they're not going to let you in. What do you think you're going to do? Right? You're done, right? Or they'll put you away for a year or more. Anyway, so I think that's a really neat paper, and I read more than one like that. This is a nice short one that has a pretty succinct way of putting it. I'm going to leave this in my thing, but I'm going to move it up to the top. The next one is, John replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet, I am the voice of the one calling in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord. All right, let's see what that is in Greek. Here's the King James. He said, I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord. As said the prophet Isaiah. He was making known his thoughts, ego. It's not. Phone, a tone, articulate, bestial, artificial. Bon tos, hallowing, calling aloud in the emero, the lonesome, eutherinate, to steer straight the way. The way. Of the supreme in authority, according to the manner in which he said, Isaiah the prophet, a foreteller. So, here's a translation. Now, what did John just tell them? What did he say when he said he was Isaiah? He said,
I'm the one they predicted.
well, yes, he said, I am not. Ego imi. Ego imi. I am not the prophet. I am not Isaiah. What did he just tell them? Now I'm going to try to explain this.
He's saying the same words as the prophet said.
He was making known his thoughts. I am, and this is the Greek usage. In Greek, you find, if I say ego, the presumption is the am follows. I don't use ego imi because that is considered implied form. It's a bad form. So I don't usually say that. When you see somebody saying ego imi, you'll sometimes see imi, and sometimes you'll see ego. He's emphasizing the I. That's what Greek can do. So you add in the am. I am a tone. I'm a sound, a tone, in the lonesome place, to steer straight the way of the supreme in authority, the Kyrios, according to the manner in which, just as Isaiah the foreteller said. Okay, what did John just do? Now, here you go. Now we're going to put our Greek hats on. Put your Greek hat on. Greek is concrete. English is euphemistic. Hebrew is euphemistic. So, can John ever say, I am Isaiah?
No, because he's not born.
No. And we don't believe in reincarnation, right? There's no reincarnation going here. So, if the Jewish idea was Isaiah was taken up in a whirlwind, and therefore he would physically come back. Well, we know that John was born of a mother, a woman. So from a Greek standpoint, a logical, reasonable, rational, and physical standpoint, could John ever be Isaiah?
No.
Never. Now, he could be the prophet, but he said, I am not the prophet and I'm not Isaiah. And then what did he do in verse 23? He just said, he confirmed that he is the prophet. Now, why would he do that? This is really similar to what we see with Jesus Christ. He did it all the time. It's a Greek irony. What he's doing, like, for example, when they asked Jesus, should you pay taxes to Caesar? Actually, should you pay tribute to Caesar? And Jesus didn't answer them straight out, right? He didn't say yes, and he didn't say no. What did he tell them?
You have a coin?
To Caesar what belongs to Caesar and to God.
And what belongs to Caesar?
Nothing.
According to the Old Testament, nothing belongs to Caesar, it all belongs to God. Now, if Jesus had come out and said, everything belongs to God, don't pay tribute to Caesar, what would have happened to good old Jesus?
He got crucified earlier.
He would have been crucified way early, and
Probably by the
and it would have-
Romans.
right? And in John, he slips away. But Jesus wanted to make a point. Look, the Greeks are really smart about this, and we should be smarter about this. If you want to make a point and get your point across, do you irritate people to the point where they don't listen to you? No. You don't. If somebody says, should you pay tribute to the government, then, the answer may be no. But if you tell them a little parable, guess what? They might listen to you, and they might even agree with you at the end, and you get your point across. Well, Jesus knew this, and so did John. So what does John do? He does just like Jesus. He quotes the Old Testament, which told them, without saying that he was the prophet, without saying he was the forerunner, like Isaiah, what did he just tell the Levites and the priests? I am the prophet. He did it by not saying, I am the prophet. This is beautiful Greek. This is what we call wonderful Greek. And later on, what does Jesus call him? Elijah. Yes, sir.
So if he had come right out and said, yeah, I'm the prophet, would they have croaked him? Or
Who knows? But
and would they have considered that blasphemy? Or
bingo. Look, even quoting the Torah them gets you in trouble, right? Because they said, well, you can't pull a kid out of you can't pull a, whatever, you can't heal a person on a Shabbat. And Jesus goes, well, can you pull an animal out of the well? The Mishnah says that. And by the way, that's from the Torah. So they got really irritated when he told the Torah back to them. But we see this. This begins, it doesn't end, it's a Greek irony. And it's a beautiful Greek method of presenting a truth where the writer, the speaker, makes a declaration, I'm not. And then what did he do? He quotes something that makes it obvious that he knows he is. This is beautiful. Okay? We obviously said don't figure this out. We also see the term Teen Hodos. Teen Hodos, the common name of the sect later called Christians by the Greeks. The sects of Judaism. Let's see, and here I got this. In this, God does claim to be the prophet in Isaiah, and that from Malachi. This is a Greek irony. He does not want to claim to be Elijah nor the prophet. He makes his declaration by the sign of the Torah, the Tanakh, from Isaiah. Classical Greek means and method. It would help if we learned, they taught us a little bit of Greek stuff, right? Unfortunately, I didn't even get Greek in school at all. They ignore that because it could be Bible stuff or something. Anyway, let's talk about the sects of Judaism. I'm going to talk in more detail. There are 5 sects of Judaism: Essenes, Zealots, Pharisees, Sadducees, Teen Hodos. That's from Helsinki. Teen Hodos is a group of Messianic Jews who began to be called Christians by the Greeks, later was simply called and identified as Christians. The reason the Greeks called Teen Hodos Christians comes out of their view of Teen Hodos as a mysterium. Mysterion is a really, 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 really important idea. It's starting to gain more importance in some of our schools and other collegiate training. But for some reason we ignored Mysterion. I'm not sure why, but Mysterion is really an important idea. Mysterions were typically named after the founder or their god. Thus the Osirian Mysterion, Osiris, the Pythagorean Mysterion, Pythagoras, the Mithran Mysterion, Mithras, and the Christian Mysterion, right? That's the way they did it. At the time, the Christians were called themselves Teen Hodos, the way, Teen Hodos. We see this reflected in all the documents of the New Testament, but most strongly in Mark and Acts. For example, Acts 9, we read, "Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous." I didn't retranslate this into Greek, but I got it for you. "Murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to Teen Hodos, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus, his journey, so that a light, etc., etc." Teen Hodos, the way. That's them. That's us'ns. The way. Like I said, it's really funny that Strong's turns Cheerio, turns grace into, this huge spiritual term, and yet totally ignores the way. I think it's almost funny. It shouldn't surprise anybody. Malachi used these terms to describe the coming of the Lord of many servants. In the Septuagint, the term is translated Teen Hodos, the way. Malachi says repeatedly, when the Lord comes, he will place the feet of the people back on the way, Teen Hodos, that the way of the Lord is the way. The fifth sect of Judaism was called Teen Hodos, the way, and was known by the Greeks as Christians. This was the Greek understanding of Teen Hodos as a Greek mysterion. We see this in Acts 24. When the government motioned for him to speak, Paul replied, "I know that for a number of years you've been a judge over this nation," etc. "You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago I went to Jerusalem to worship. My accusers, etc., let's see, and the charges making against me. However, I admit that I worship the God of our fathers as a follower of the way." The way. This is NIV, which they call a sect. Oh, wait. Has anyone heard of the sect of Teen Hodos, the Christian sect? I never got that in my Sunday school. It's right there in Acts. It's right there in the NIV. It must be true, right? "I believe everything that agrees with the law and is written in the prophets. I have the same hope of God, etc. These men, the resurrection, righteousness, and the wicked. I strive to keep my conscience clear. After absence, several years came," etc. On and on and on. Temple courts, on the way. 21, "Unless it was this one thing I shouted as I stood in their presence. It's concerning the resurrection of the dead that I'm on trial before you today. Then Felix, who was well acquainted with the way." Look at that. Felix is well acquainted with the way. Teen Hodos. "Adjourned the proceedings. When Lysias, the commander, comes and said, I will decide your case." Well, guess what? Felix knows a lot more about the way than we seem to. Our children should know this, but for some reason they don't know it either. We see the economy of the use of the terms Teen Hodos and Christian from Herod. He's a Greek thinker compared to Paul Saul, originally a Jew of the Pharisee sect and a Greek and Hebrew thinker, and Felix, a Roman, Latin, and Greek thinker. In Acts 26, let's see. This is the defense that Paul made before, and I'll skip up here a little bit. Let's see. "I'm not saying, most excellent Festus," Paul replied. "What I'm saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I'm convinced that none of this has escaped his notice, because it's not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe in the prophets? I know you do." Then Agrippa said to Paul, "Do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian?" Christian? Paul replied, "Short or long, I pray to God not only to you, but all that are listening to me today, that I become what I am except for these chains." Why did Agrippa use the term Christian?
Because it was synonymous with the way.
And he was a
Is it Greek?
Greek thinker. Okay? If he had been, he was Greek thinking. Remember, he's Hellenized. He's deep Hellenized. He wanted to be, he was the Hebrew king, right? But he was deep Hellenized. And it also indicates that what was probably his primary language? Greek. You know, and look at, Festus, or Felix and Festus, are using the term the way, because guess what? They're using the term the way because that's what the way called themselves. Good old Agrippa had only one thing to go by. Yes, sir.
Plus, they still saw themselves as Jews.
Teenhodos did, yes. Teenhodos did. Agrippa's, there's weird stuff going on with Agrippa. Agrippa didn't know what he was. He didn't have a clue, right? And he gets bonked by the Romans anyway. Later, he's done. So anyway, Agrippa said to Paul, persuaded a Christian. Acts further in 11 tells us this where the term Christian came from. And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. So for a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught great numbers of people. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. What's important about Antioch? Antioch was a Greek city. It was not a Hebrew city. It's Greek, mainly Greek. It's in that area in the Levant. But it was a fully on Greek city. And the reason they called them, the Teenhodos guys, Christians, because they looked like a mysterion. That was a huge thing we talked about in some of the other works we've looked at. Notice that Felix, Paul, Saul calls the sect the way. He calls it a sect. Felix sees Teenhodos as a Jewish issue problem, sect problem. Felix is a Gentile and a Roman who speaks Latin and Greek. On the other hand, Agrippa immediately calls it Christian. Agrippa sees Teenhodos as a Gentile issue, a mysterion group sect problem. Agrippa is a Hellenized Jew who speaks Aramaic and Greek, apparently. So here's a point based on the use of the term Teenhodos and Christian. Teenhodos and Christian refer to the same group. They are both the same sect of Judaism. And this is really important because we need to realize that we are a sect of Judaism. So it's appropriate for you to do Seder. In fact, I was talking to Tammy, I said we do a Seder in the Passover, a Christian Seder. But I think it'd be wonderful to do each of the Jewish festivals, right, in their turn, just to celebrate them because they were the original parts of the sect of Judaism, right, of Teenhodos. So God probably intends for us, we keep our Christian tradition, but to keep the tradition of the our Jewish prologue, our Jewish pro-people, right, that we came from. So anyway, we can't, yes, sir.
I was just going to say, but a number of times you say we're subject to the Noahic covenant.
Yes, we
Not the
are.
Mosaic.
Yes.
But if we're Jews, why
We're
are
not
we?
ethnic Jews, though.
We are not under the, we are not required to follow the Mosaic covenant, which is a wonderful thing, a boon to us. However, the festivals, even the Jewish people, when you had the foreigners in Jerusalem or in the Jewish area, what were they required to do? Follow the festivals, right? So, and plus, you get to eat and drink and have a great time and, celebrate, right? This is a positive. I see this as I don't see any negatives in this at all. And the First Fruits Festival, right after the Passover. And the next one, I think, is Ruth, the one predecessing her, right? Yeah, Ruth is with a Shabbat, where they bring the two interlaced loaves to celebrate the Torah. I'm sorry I went over. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look out this week in your name. We pray. Amen.
Did you guys see in the paper where they opened that new Jewish worship center in Tallgrass, and they did a processions on Rock Road? They got a new Torah, and they had a procession with the rabbis and their Torah.
When did they do that?
Oh, was that 2 weeks ago? And so there's a new Jewish worship center over in Tallgrass.
That's what I was gonna say, is that
No,
new?
no, they joined with the one on Woodlawn. The two synagogues joined together, and they're at Woodlawn now. But this is a new, I don't know if it's a more, traditional, like a civic or whatever, but it's called Shabbat something. But they had that was in the paper. They were
Thank you, good job.
parading their new.
Enjoy it. I'm reading your book. I'll get to it back to you eventually. You need it anytime soon.
On Rock Road.
No, really, right around?
There's no less. Yeah.
What's good?
It's great.
Yeah.
Big turn.
There's tacos and.
It tastes great wrapped in bacon.
Talking about the rest of this.
Right, that.
Okay.
No class next week.
Yeah, let me see what I can find.
No class next week. Tell your
Very old sister. He's a brewer man, she's a company, so they go and record on it.
They had some stuff, but you know, a lot of that Bowen stuff is,
I've seen some online too,
yeah.
but I'm curious about,
So they go and
I worked on the B-17, so it's really interesting. And then, but I'm curious about what he did when
we got
he
some
came back,
Minnesota.
what brought him back to employment in 1948.
Yeah.
I think it was the 47, B-47.
Well, they built the what do you call them, they built the B-29s, and then they built the